Okay. I haven't heard from Michaela, so I'm going to assume she'll be with us as soon as she can, and we'll just go ahead and get started. First off, any questions or issues with last week's work?
I just had a couple questions in regards to the assignment and then the assessment.
Okay.
I can't seem to, it's not like the units throwing me off. I'm just not sure if I'm applying the right formula. But when it's
Okay.
talking about the units of heparin for both, I think it was question 11 on the assignment.
Okay.
And then,
Let me go ahead and pull that up.
yes, it's 11 for the.
Okay. Question 11. Okay. Patient needs 200 units of heparin per hour for the next 24 hours. You get a bag that contains 10,000 units in 1,000 milliliters of normal saline. What's the flow rate? Okay. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. The best way is to ask yourself how much at 200 units per hour for 24 hours, how many units is that going to be?
Okay, so you would take 200 and divide that by 24,
No,
correct?
it's 200 per hour.
Oh. Oh, so that's already solved for us.
Yeah, we know what the rate of units per hour is
Okay.
going to be. So if we look at that, 200 units per hour is the rate.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so
that
then
would,
we have, that's the dose prescribed.
okay. And
So
then we do that dose ordered over dose on hand times the vehicle.
yeah,
Okay. I was doing one extra step. Now I understand.
right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and so you probably overthink it a bit. So
Yes.
that's going to be 200 units per hour divided by 10,000 units and then multiplied by 1,000.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I definitely overthought that. So 200 divided by 10,000 times 1,000 would be 20 milliliters per hour.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, I definitely overthought that. I
Okay.
can't believe that.
Yeah. Don't overthink any of these.
Okay.
But I mean, I can understand it. They give you a lot of information. You really don't care that it's 24 hours.
Right. Now I
All
see
you,
that.
yeah. But if we take a look at it as I started out, looking at how many units over 24 hours, that's going to be 4,800 units. So we're not going to be delivering the entire bag.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's you know, so there you get an idea as to how simple these things can be. And you know, right.
I just
And
wanted
they
to make
really are.
sure. Oh, yes. No, that was very simple. Why I couldn't think of that myself. I was
Well,
just doing one step too many.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And then
So now, so you have another question?
on question 13 on the assignment as well.
Patient has a prescription for amoxil 375 POBID, 150 milliliters of amoxil, 250 milligrams per 5 milliliter suspension. So what we want to know here first is how much is going to be taken per day. So we've got 375 milligrams is the dose prescribed per dose, right?
Yes.
250 milligrams is on hand and 5 milliliters is the vehicle. So we figure out how many milliliters, and here we're not even caring that the patient's going to take it in teaspoonfuls. We want to know milliliters.
Okay.
Right? So we find out how many milliliters at a time that is. Since it's BID dosing, we double that, and that's how much the patient will take in a day. And we simply divide that into the total volume dispensed to get the number of days.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So that would be 375 divided by 250 times 5 milliliters. So we would do the dose ordered over the dose on hand
Right.
times the vehicle. So doing that, I got 7.5 milliliters
Right. Per dose.
per dose.
Right.
That's 2 times a day. So it would be 15 milliliters
Per day.
per day. And then we take, whoa, 150 milliliters and divide that by the 15.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. I got 10 days.
Yep.
Okay. I did one too many steps that one as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think simple.
Simple. Okay. Think simple.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, Mike. I apologize that you
Not
had
a
to
problem.
those two.
Not a problem. I don't have an issue with that. It's easy to overthink them. We think these things are more complicated than they are.
I agree.
And, you know, some of them look more complicated, but you just break them down. And what you're really looking for ultimately is what is the dose that's actually going to be given to the patient.
Right. Not
Once
all
you
that
have that,
fluff.
yeah, once you have that, all the other information you need should be there.
Okay.
And then you just plug it into the dose prescribed divided by dose on hand times the vehicle, that formula. Sometimes you have to play with the data to convert units, and you have to do, you know, you have to figure out what the dose that is actually going to be delivered is at a time. So, you know, it just takes some time sometimes and a little care.
For some reason on that problem, I was thinking I had to convert milliliters to milligrams. So I was taking a volume to a weight, and it was throwing me off. So I think that's what was happening.
Yeah, remember that doses are always in either a volume for a liquid or, you know, for a solid dosage form, a capsule or a tablet.
Okay.
Okay.
I will remember that. But
I'm
thank you
just,
again
um,
for explaining.
I'm just responding quickly to Michaela. She says she'll be with us real soon.
No problem.
Okay. So what other questions do you have?
That sums it up for the assignment, and now it makes sense why I got that answer wrong on the assessment. Because I was doing one step too many.
Right, right. Well,
So,
you know, I did change that so that you can do the assessment again. Unless you've already
okay.
done it your 3 times.
No, I believe I only did it the once for the assessment.
Right. Well, you can do it again.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So that's fully set and ready to go. All right.
Perfect.
So any other questions?
No, that was all, Mike. Thank you.
You're welcome. When Kayla gets on, we'll probably go through this again.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I would not be surprised if she has some questions as well.
Last week was a little tricky. It definitely threw me for a loop.
I bet. So yeah, they do get a little tricky. They look tricky until you. It's practice. It's like anything else. When I teach algebra or statistics, I tell my students that the only way you can learn to do math is to do math.
Right.
Make your mistakes, see what they are, learn from them, and go from there. So you know, we can go. You know, we can always find a way to make things more complicated than they need to be, and we're real good at that. All of us, including me, I can make things a lot more complex than they need to until I sit down and think about it and say, wait a minute, why am I doing this?
Right. I kind of got tired with myself. I was like, I'm just doing something wrong, and I know it's me. And I even was like, this has to be simplified somehow.
Yep.
I was
Yeah.
just not making the connections in my brain.
And it's easy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So let's start talking about this week, and then when Kayla gets on, we'll do questions. My plan today was to talk about some clerical issues. We will watch a short video that is very interesting. It has to do with what our ethical responsibilities are when we're working in a practice. And when we get to that, I'll give you I'll tell you a story that a friend of ours told us one time as well, that will emphasize why you don't want to let unethical practices go unchallenged. But what we're looking at this week, we'll look at the learning objectives. You're going to, your assignment this week will be to use EHR Go and perform this patient account analysis.
Okay.
You're going to learn a bit about accounting tasks and expense reporting. We'll talk about that. Tax filing guidelines, we'll very briefly touch on those. And part of your discussion will be looking at sources of error and the impact that they might have on a practice. So we'll be going through that in between the discussions and the assignment.
Okay.
So let's go back here. And our first discussion has to do with some amount of payroll, expense reporting, and operational budgets. I told you last week that operational budgets probably will not be a major part of what you do, for the simple reason that really the budget needs to be set by the practice management. And you may, as a medical assistant, you're not really going to be terribly involved in that. However, in order to construct an operational budget, we need to know what our revenues have been over the last, usually we'll base these things over the last several years. What have our revenues been? What are the trends in those revenues? Are they going up? Are they going down? Or are they staying pretty flat? Those are really the three scenarios.
Okay.
And if they are changing year to year, by how much? Okay, is the business growing? Are the revenues increasing, or are you losing patients, losing revenues? And there's lots of reasons that can happen that have nothing to do with the practice. If you're working in a practice that has a lot of Medicare and Medicaid patients, then you're dependent on what the government's willing to pay.
Right.
And that we have little real control over as individuals. Our professional organizations are the ones that will handle the lobbying with politicians for that. Payroll is again a specialty, but really payroll is really a paperwork issue. And all the paperwork has to be right. We have to have proper addresses, Social Security, et cetera, et cetera. We have to know what their salaries are. Okay, so we can calculate based on time card information what each employee works during each pay period. And pay periods can be weekly, rarely, semi-monthly, commonly, or monthly, which is also a relatively common sort of thing. What benefits you have, and you usually have the software you use will calculate based on the information that's put in. They'll calculate various things like the benefits, the vacation and sick day accruals, etc. All of these will be going into the individual employee pay account. The paycheck usually is calculated by the software that you use based on the database that includes their rate. It will look at overtime and any required additional pay for overtime. If your practice classifies you as non-exempt, then you'll be on a salary. So that's even easier. But one of the things you have to be careful of when you're on a salary is that you're not being asked to put in more hours than you're theoretically being paid for without compensation. I had a friend years ago who worked for what was then the Martin Corporation, now Martin Marietta, now part of Lockheed. And he was building the Viking lander. And that was part of his job. And Lockheed demanded 20 hours of overtime a week before they would pay overtime. So that's an abusive practice.
Very much so.
Yeah, and but that's what they required. And I don't know what may have happened. I'm sure that they've had a few lawsuits over that kind of thing because that really violates a lot of wage and hour regulations.
Well, and how they could get away with that in today's society, that's...
Well, it depends on how many politicians you own, doesn't it?
Very true.
So, but operational budgets are really based on two things. Basically what are our expected income, what are our expected expenses, and you budget for these things. And you know, depending on the the practice management's philosophy about budgeting, you may or may not put in a little extra to take on unexpected expenses. But nonetheless, you compare that over the previous years, and look at what your expectations could be. You also look at how you're going to spend that money. Just because you budgeted $10,000 for, say, ACE bandages, doesn't mean that at the beginning of the year you spend $10,000 and get a storeroom full of those things. So you have to be looking at these as over time as well.
That makes sense.
Okay, Kayla, are you on?
Yeah, good morning.
Great, glad to have you here. We've started talking a little bit about the administrative stuff that we're doing. And I'm just looking at the first discussion for this week, which is about, you know, certain aspects of financial management, payroll, expense, and operational budgets. Not things that I expect you to get intimately involved in right away when you go to work, but things that you need to know. So we look at these things, and we think about why we need to know how to do these various things one way or the other. Doesn't mean that when you walk into a business that you have to know every detail of how to run an office, because mainly you guys are going to be going for your clinical medical assistant certification. But you may find yourself answering the phone, scheduling appointments, doing all sorts of things if you're in a small practice. As I said before, in a large practice, there's usually plenty of people who do that on their own or as their job, and they don't, and then you have your clinical staff in the back. So this is a discussion that you can look at. I've already made a post, so let's take it from there. And Kayla, before we go into the second discussion of the week, a brief discussion of that, do you have any questions from last week?
No, I was gonna turn those in yesterday, but I got home pretty late, so I was gonna.
Fine. Go ahead and get them turned in, because I need to be able to grade them and pass the progress information along. People are very happy with both of your performance in this class so far. So I'm very pleased that you guys are working as hard as you are.
Thank you.
So let's then take a look at the second discussion of the week, which is sources of accounting error and impact. Accounting is a skill, but like any skill, it depends on having the right information. And that information is related to where is the money coming from and where is it going. Money coming in is called credit. We call it income, but in accounting terminology, it's a credit in the accounting books. Money going out, whether it's an expense, whether it's you know, a reimbursement for things, no matter what, is a debit. Again, if you're looking at your personal expenses, you think about income versus expenses. Accountants think in terms of credits, those that have a positive impact on the net income of the organization, and debits, those that have a negative effect on the income of the organization. There is no organization that's all about credit, and we hope no organization that's all about debit, because they go broke.
Yeah.
but we need to keep accurate records, and those records will depend on a number of factors. For instance, income. Where does it come from? You know, there are several places where it can come from. One is obviously copays from your patients or direct payments from patients. Copays if they're insured, or you know, direct payments if they're not. Insurance, and that includes the government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, CHIP, and so forth. So all of those are sources of income, and we have to keep a record of our sources of income as well, for two reasons. Number one is some of these things are treated a little differently. Some of them have limits. Some of them have to be reported separately on accounts. So that's done by the accountant. Nobody's asking or assuming you guys are going to be accountants. Although, you know, at some point you may decide you like that, but nonetheless, you have to keep those records. And anything that is owed, patients will give you their copay, but the insurance pays later, and the government pays even later than that. But so we have the money that comes in, payment received, and the other is the accounts receivable, those that we haven't gotten yet. So when we have a patient, we have a charge. We have that charge as part of our standard package. The patient actually doesn't necessarily see that. The patient gives you the copay. Let's say it's a $25 copay. So you record a $25 income as the copay. And then the rest of that you've billed to the insurance company goes into a classification known as accounts receivable. This is money that we are expecting to receive. And we want to know this because we want to track that. And when that money is received, it's taken out of accounts receivable and goes into you know, the credits. Cash management is really an issue is something that all of us know about from trying to run households and lead our lives. We want to be sure that we have sufficient cash. We call it liquid money, meaning money that is available to be spent instead of tied up in things like CDs or investments or whatever. So we want to be sure that we have sufficient cash to pay our bills, and you know, in many businesses, the largest bill you have is going to be employees. That's the largest single category of expense. Now, in a medical practice, there may be some other expenses that will rival that, such as supplies and medical supplies and equipment that you need. But we need to know what they are. All of this is so that we do not have errors. Errors can be errors for the most part. When people make an error, it's usually because they have misclassified an item, either as income or as an expense, or they have failed to record it. The IRS gets really unhappy when you don't report all of your income and you don't report your expenses properly. And the expenses are divided into many, many categories. But when you're doing this, we have to be very careful to follow what is called generally accepted accounting practices, which is standards of accounting that allow us to make sure that we record everything properly. Well, that's the accountant's job, but any records that you're responsible for keeping are critical to the accountant being able to do their job. You want an accountant who understands the business you're in. It's very different to run a medical facility than, say, an auto parts store. They both have the same requirement of properly recording expenses and income and properly characterizing all of that. But in a medical practice, things are a little more complicated, especially since so much of our income comes from outside sources, not the customer, but come from the customer's insurance. As I say, the insurance can be Medicare, Medicaid, can be Blue Cross, can be any of the many insurers. There are hundreds of insurers, even though that pool is shrinking. But nonetheless, there are lots of places where this could come from. You have to make sure that money that comes in, people will use credit card. Most practices prefer credit cards these days. And for obvious reasons, those are important. In that it's a more secure source of income. But there are many people that still prefer to either pay in cash or by check, and it's up to the practice as to whether they will accept checks. Most will accept checks from their regular customers. But most of us use credit cards. I mean, we're not quite like the Scandinavian countries, which have gone cashless largely. So, and anything you do just about has to be with a card. But we are approaching that. Oh yeah.
Wow.
When we visit Denmark and visit our daughter there, we discovered that it was hard to find a bank that had cash in it, that we could exchange our money, our US dollars, for Danish kroner.
Wow.
And when we found out, I said, a bank that doesn't have money? What kind of logic is there behind that? And it's really because they're moving to a cashless society, and Sweden has gone further than Denmark in that. But we had a hard time even finding an ATM.
Wow.
So, and the first time we found one, it didn't have any money left in it.
Of course not.
So it was kind of interesting. But now the next thing is that, the IRS gets very picky about errors. There are honest errors. People do make mistakes. There is no doubt about that. And most of those, the IRS will say, okay, naughty, here, this is what you need to do to fix it. But occasionally someone decides to try and play games. And so they find what I call a creative accountant. And do you know what creative accountants are eventually called?
Embezzlers?
Inmates, yeah.
Inmates.
They go to jail.
Yes.
But yeah, they are embezzlers. But the problem is that the IRS is going to assume that the people in the practice are responsible for these and are complicit in that illegal activity, whether they are or not. A friend of ours, a very, very smart woman financially, was an officer in a bank in California many, many years ago. And the bank managers, not her, but the bank managers were embezzling money. And she made Excuse the noise in the background. We're still having work done downstairs. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Kayla, can you?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, good. Since this was a national bank, a branch of a national bank, the FBI got involved. And so she got a call, and the FBI said, "We want to interview you." Well, her first mistake was she said, "Yeah, come on over," instead of, "Let me talk to my lawyer and we'll figure out when a good time is," because you have to realize that the FBI is supposed to catch criminals, and they look for criminal activity. So you want to be careful that you're protected. Anyway, she didn't do that, and she very, very narrowly got out of being included in the charges filed against the bank officers, and only because she could prove that she had nothing to do with those areas that they were stripping money out of. But it scared her, as you can imagine, when
Oh, I'm sure.
the FBI says, "Well, we may have to arrest you." That's not what you want to hear,
No.
especially when you're innocent. So again, one of the reasons we want to be careful is that I call it the splash effect. When they're going to come after anybody and everybody that's involved in the practice, and if you are part of the team that is supposed to be keeping track of expenses and everything else, you're probably going to be targeted. Now, will this happen? Chances are not. However, if we look at medicine currently, the places where financial fraud in medicine occur have to do with the government programs. For the most part, Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare fraud costs this country something like at least $50 billion a year.
Wow.
It's a real major issue. And none of us like to think that, that we're going to get involved in that. But if you're working in a practice and you know something, then there is an issue there. So what I want to do at this point is pull up a short video. We're going to go to the online educational resources for this class. And we're going to look at the topic is ethical accounting. Let me just say that, 99% of accountants are doing their best to be ethical. Do they make mistakes? Oh, of course they do. But if you have, if you make it and correct it, that's fine. But let's take a look at a TED Talk by Kelly Richmond Pope, who is an accounting professor who does a lot of forensic accounting, in other words, fraud research, and looks at why you should, if you find out that things are going wrong, why you should blow the whistle on these people. So what I want to do, everybody can see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna play this. It's about 12 minutes, so we'll play this before we take a break. Okay, so what do you think?
That even though sometimes being a whistleblower may be difficult, it's honestly worth reporting any incidents you see.
So you don't get in trouble.
Yep. You could end up in trouble. I'll tell you an example out of the pharmaceutical industry. A number of years ago, the government decided to try to enhance the economy of Puerto Rico. So they offered the pharmaceutical industry and other industries significant tax incentives to build manufacturing facilities in Puerto Rico, because it would require, high level of training of people to work there. It would bring well-paying jobs to a place that was desperately in need of those for a lot of reasons. So just about every company in the business went down there and took advantage of it. And at a plant that ultimately ended up being owned by GlaxoSmithKline, they had a problem. What they manufactured in this plant was tablets and capsules, so solid dosage forms. There were no sterile products being manufactured, and as far as I know, no liquid products being manufactured. So, but Puerto Rico is a tropical island, and Puerto Rico has lots and lots of things like mold. And so they got an infestation of mold in the plant. Well, good manufacturing regulations for the pharmaceutical industry are close the plant, fumigate, clean it out, and then reopen. But the standard way of dealing with this is to first try to clean it up without closing the plant. Didn't work. And they were not able to get the infestation, the mold issue taken care of. And then they made a critical mistake. They lied to the FDA. I don't understand the decision-making that goes into telling lies that can be exposed. I mean, telling lies in general. But when you tell a lie that is clearly going to get caught eventually, I don't know whose head was where on that decision. But anyway, they made a decision to lie to the FDA. And they had the head of quality control. I can't remember her name, but she was another whistleblower. I want you to note how many of the whistleblowers we saw in that video were indeed women. But this woman was the head of quality assurance and quality control at this plant, and she decided that she needed to report that to the FDA. And part of that was an understanding that as the director of QA and QC, she was likely to end up being the fall guy. So she reported it. And GlaxoSmithKline got a $750 million fine. And in her case, what happened was that 600 million of that was returned to the customers who actually bought the drugs that were manufactured in that plant. Now, no one was hurt. So this is not a case of covering up something that like another case in New England a few years ago, where a number of people died from a fungal contamination of an injectable product. So it's not the same thing, but nonetheless, the fines were there because they broke the law. And what happened with her was, of course, she lost her job. There were a lot of repercussions, but in her case, she ended up getting a very large whistleblower settlement out of that package of money. So, ultimately, financially, she was okay, but professionally, she was finished. There was no way anyone in the pharmaceutical industry would ever hire her again. So keep in mind that there are lots of reasons people blow the whistle. It can be out of self-interest. If you know that you're being set up, then their best bet is to take the bull by the horns and take care of it. But in these cases that we saw from Kelly Richmond Pope, these are people that could very easily have just said, "Oh, I'm not gonna do anything about this. I want to keep my job." Blah blah blah. But the real issue is what is right. So, your ethical responsibility extends to your looking at how the practice is being run. Another example is a dentist in California who got out of dental school and got out of his initial, experience and so forth, and was ready to have his own practice. And a practice went up for sale. And he went and talked to the guy running it, and the guy just painted this enormously attractive picture of the revenues that he could expect to receive from the just a second, please. Okay, the revenues that he could expect to receive from this practice. So he started his practice up and started seeing the customers that had been coming to the previous dentist. And they'd come in and he'd look in, he'd do an exam, and his hygienist would do the cleaning, and he'd look in and say, "Oh, these are great. Your teeth are fine." And he started hearing from customers that really every time I've come in before, he found things that needed to be fixed. So he started investigating, and it turned out that this guy was doing dental procedures on people who had perfectly healthy teeth and charging a fortune. And he was not, he had lied, not only lied to him about what was going to come in, but or you might say told the truth. He just didn't tell the whole truth, which was that he was unethical in his dental practice. Well, the person who purchased it then sued the purchaser and went after him for this fraudulent behavior. I don't know how that's turned out, but nonetheless, this is an example of looking and finding unethical behavior and doing something about it. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about a couple of incidents that I'm aware of. Let's take a short break, maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about a couple of other things.
Okay, sounds good.
So I'm going to turn off the recording for now. And make sure I start it up again when I come back.
Okay.
Is everyone back?
Pharmaceuticals, when they went bankruptcy in the early 2000s due to the opioid crisis that was going on.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that they were they were okay with this, like the production of the drug and having all these pill mills, like all these doctors just prescribing opioids to people. They were making that much money that they didn't care about the fact that these people were dying because they were overdosing on the drug they were creating.
Yeah, that has been an interesting case. And the Purdue family has been being sued in civil court and other places for the damage that they have done while making themselves many times over multi-billionaires.
Yes.
And it says something about the ethics of money, and the place that that money has in our society. You know, it's easy to say this when you're not a multi-billionaire, but nobody needs $1 billion. You know, it's just not. It's not necessary.
It would be nice.
Well,
Right. It would be nice.
it would be nice, and there would be many things you could do with it if you were of a mind to make good use of such money. But just to accumulate multiple mansions and yachts and toys, you know, there's something there that just doesn't work for me. As I
Right.
say, it's easy to say when I'm not part of that class. But nonetheless, I don't think I would feel significantly different if I were now, for whatever that's worth.
Right.
But the one thing that, it would be nice to have enough money that you didn't have to worry about anything. But I guess it depends on your definition of enough. The one thing that I'm going to suggest you do, and you may have to do this in bits and pieces, but there is this particular video, this training, it's a LinkedIn learning training, is actually has some very good information in it. And what I suggest you do is take a look at it. If we take a look at this particular small piece of the transcript, it's written by an administrative support professional who not necessarily who's not worked in the medical field at all, but it does talk a lot about what the administrative professional does, or the person with administrative duties. It is worth watching. There's a couple of things you can do. I think when you turn it on, it'll take you to a place where you can actually download or actually copy the URL to go back to it after you no longer have access to this class. So it is something to consider looking at to prepare yourself for the possible kinds of activities that you could be involved in.
Okay.
We're not going to do that 3-hour stint in our class. That's just a little bit too much. So where we are now with this is that we are in week 4. Both of you have some work to catch up on. So what I'm going to suggest, let's go back to the week. This week has the usual stuff in it. The 2 discussions. Our in-class assignment we'll discuss on Wednesday. The assignment here, as I said before, if we pull this up, the assignment is to use EHRGO and call up the medical records of 2 patients. This guy, Harrington, and this woman, Johnson. And we can bring up EHRGO and then access the chart through that. With Harrington, he's annoyed that he has some charges he doesn't understand. So you're going to create a script to talk to him, use as a basis for talking to him about those charges and why they're there. And since he's part of his complaint is that he doesn't have the money to pay them, how we can set up some payment plan options. We understand that medicine is expensive, and so a lot of times when there are large medical bills, a practice will set up a way for the patient to pay it, and then the charges that are being paid off go into accounts receivable, and that accounts receivable are for that charge is reduced every time we get a payment. So we have to, again, if we're taking payments, we're recording those for our accountant. So you just save the script and post it. The second patient wants to know what's the difference between the insurance payment and what she owes, so you're going to create a letter for her. And then save that as a differently named document. Don't use the same name for the document for both, or it will simply replace the first one you put in. So you need to give it a different name. And then I can look at each one of these and grade the assignment.
Okay.
Makes sense to everyone?
Yes.
Kayla, you happy with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, great. So that's the assignment this week. So obviously there won't be, we won't be, that will be graded as a pair of written documents. So remember that you're creating a script and a letter. Write it as a letter, dear Mrs. Johnson, etc. Okay. So let's go back. The assessment this week. You have this learning quiz. I think that in almost all cases, you're going to have to write an answer. So I will have to grade this assessment. And then you have the usual career integration quiz at the end. So that's really what's up for this week besides the two discussions. So what I'd like to do for both of you, at this point, we have about an hour and 3/4 left this morning. I would like to, keep you guys online, but have you work on some of the back work that still needs to be turned in so that we can get you caught up and get you prepared to finish the class, okay?
Okay. Do you think there's any way, like, maybe like on Wednesday or something, is there a way that you can open like the checkpoints that we didn't do? Or is that not?
Open what, Kayla?
Like the checkpoints that we missed for this class? Are you not able to do that?
Well, I'm not supposed to, but I'll look and see what I can do about that, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I can go back through and look at that.
Thank you.
So I'd like you to, I'm going to pause the recording and mute my microphone so that the noise here in the house doesn't come through.
Okay.
And you guys work on this stuff. I will be here. If you have questions, just ask.
Okay.
And
Sounds
I'll
good.
go back to recording and talking. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
I just wanted to say hi. We haven't talked for a long time.
Okay. How are you doing? You getting some things done?
Yeah. I'm
Good.
working on the assignment right now.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I'm just here working on some other things, getting some grading done. I sent you an email, so I don't know if you've seen that yet.
Oh no, I'll look at it right now.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, it's
I'm worrying.
well, you're doing fine. So let's just keep going. All right.
Okay.
All right. Great. I'll still be here.
Okay. Me too.
Great. Kayla, Ariel.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there. Just wanted to close out the class because it's almost 12:15.
Oh, goodness.
So go ahead.
I didn't notice what time it was.
No, it's easy to get caught up in doing the work, which is great. You need to get it done. So go ahead and finish off stuff, and we will come back on Wednesday and finish out the class. Kayla, the first part of the class that you missed, you can just, when I get the video posted, you can listen to it. It talks a little about, we went through a couple of the questions that Ariel had
Okay.
from last week. So you can see what we talked about there.
Cool. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I will see you guys on Wednesday morning for the last class of the mod. Oh, and by the way, we'll be Zooming again next mod if you have an on-ground type class.
Okay.
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 So go ahead and also you can get into the student portal and check your schedule for next mod. I don't have it.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Well,
Great.
thank you.
You're welcome. We'll see you both on Wednesday.
Sounds
See
good.
you later.
Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.